So this week we're going to do what I'm considering kind of like a little palette cleanser of a project. I have finished assembling the main like suit to my current cosplay build, and I'm going to take a little break for a couple of reasons. First, I just need to like scrub my brain and do something that's going to be a little bit easier for me to do. And second, I took my kids with me randomly just to go see what was going on at Joann's, and my daughter in the process was like, I want this fabric. And she purchased the fabric herself, purchased a pattern, and now I am roped into helping her make a dress. So this dress is basically her own imagined ideas of what she is hoping to get out of the fabric that she has picked out. This pattern she picked out is not going to end up being exactly the final product. She has decided to take off some of the embellishments, change the sleeves. So there is going to be a little bit of pattern manipulation in this project. And then also, she has picked probably the most maximal fabric that I saw at the store. It has beads, it has sequins, it has embroidered peacock feathers, embroidered flowers, embroidered vinery, and we are going to have to pick off so many beads and sequins so that I do not destroy my machine. It is going to be an absolute joy. But it will be nice to kind of do something that's not super complicated, something that is kind of straightforward in design and build. Before I move on to more difficult projects again, I have still a lot to my cosplay to do, and it's stuff that I am not as familiar with, so kind of having this, like, I don't know, palette cleanser in between difficult project and difficult project is kind of refreshing, so let's make a cute little dress this week.
So this is the fabric that we're working with. We have a lining here and this kind of lacy beaded fabric that she picked out. This is the pattern that she chose. We're gonna go with the shorter dress because that's what she liked. We're gonna alter the sleeves, but she does really want to keep the peignets on the dress, but we are gonna make them removable just for ease of use and to change up the style. One thing that I realized about this pattern after purchasing it is that it says the size on here, and I assumed that she was going to be a size 7, which is the smallest size on this pattern that we have here. She is going to be smaller than that size, so we are going to have to resize this pattern in order to fit her, but it shouldn't be too bad. Since I have to resize this pattern, we're going to try it out on some test fabric first, to make sure that we can get it just the right size for her while still using this base pattern as an example for what we plan on doing. When I personally resize a pattern, I don't like cutting into the pattern, especially it allows for ease of use later on if the child is grown or you change sizes. Then the pattern hasn't been cut down to where you can't see the original markings that were there. So what I tend to do is I fold in the corners of the paper, the edges of the paper here, to get down to the smaller marking while preserving these larger mark lines. And to get into the curves, I'm going to snip into the paper just a little bit, so that the paper then will fold smoothly around the curves. Then I can use the pattern as a smaller size. So this is the pattern laid out here on the fabric after we've tested out cutting it the smaller size. One thing that I did not take into account at the beginning is that this fabric has an edge on it, and I'm going to have to account for the edge, like the bottom edge of the skirt as well as the bottom edge of the sleeve, and make sure that I have space all the way down the length of this in order to be able to edge both the sleeve and the skirt with this cute little scalloped pattern at the bottom of the fabric. So as you can see here, I will help to also alter the shape of this skirt, because if I want the scalloped pattern at the bottom to be able to go across the entire bottom of the skirt, I have to actually tilt this pattern here so that the bottom of the skirt follows this scalloped edge, which means I now have to make the waistband of this a little bit larger right here on the edge so that I can keep that bottom along the right length there, and then also I'll just gather it some more later. So this fabric is covered in sequins and beads, as you can see here. And because of that, I'm not going to be able to just throw this into my machine. I'm going to have to cut away all of the sequins and beads that are going to be along the seam space, the seam allowance. So that is going to be a little bit of a chore. This is going to take me at least a couple hours to just sit here and pluck all of the little seed beads and sequins off of the edges of all of the pieces of this dress. I was being conservative in the beginning, trying to take off as little as I could, and I actually later had to go in and do yet another session of weeding, I guess, on this fabric because I hadn't taken enough off when I went through the first time. So, spent a lot of time taking off all the little bits and pieces. I actually collected them up in the end, so we have like a little bowl full of cast off remnants of these little beads and sequins that we took off of the dress. So after all the material had been prepped, I cut out all of my pattern pieces and we took off all of the extra beads and sequins that were going to be in the way of the machine. I could then take all of my lining pieces and serge them. I like to use the serger as kind of also a substitute for stay stitching, so when that comes up in directions on my sewing patterns, I generally will just use the serger as the stay stitch and skip the stay stitch direction altogether. So I spent some time prepping these bodice pieces. I have snipped away all of my main seam beads and sequins, and then I spent some time this morning kind of snipping away the beads and sequins that are down the darts. I marked them out with like a basting thread so I knew generally where I was going to need to clear away a path to sew. And then I basted my darts into place so that I could then have like an even clearer view of what I needed to cut away as far as the sequins and beads go. So now I feel pretty confident that I can put these darts in. Both the front and my back pieces are up here. Did the same thing to them, front and back. And then we can assemble this bodice. So from here, now that I have all those like things cut away, we should be good to just start assembling. I did decide I wanted to do a full lining on the inside of the bodice. No, lining pieces are here. So I did cut out a second version of the front and back I don't like it when patterns do that like false tucked in collar thing. I feel like that's just cheap and a cop-out. So we're gonna do a full lining on the dress so that we can like incorporate it into the zipper and then take it all the way down to the skirt line so we don't have like raw edge skirt attached to the front. I actually made these lining pieces a little bit longer so I can wrap them around the gathering of the skirt so that she doesn't have any like raw edges kind of on her skin when she's wearing the dress. Alright, so this is what our darts look like before I sew them up. They're just basted on the inside, kind of loose, and then these two have been actually sewn together and they're looking really nice, pretty seamless. Anyway, so we're gonna do that over here with these two darts, and then we can start assembling the bodice. And this is the zipper, but anyway, yeah.
So here's what the bodice looks like, just kind of pinned onto her shape, and then we can move on. So she actually wanted to sew some of this on her own because this was going to be a dress for her. When we got to the long sides of the skirt, I allowed her to get on there and practice her sewing skills, and she did a great job doing these long straight seams, and she's very proud of her work.
So this is the pannier. I've already kind of got it pinned, the little hem at the bottom. This is going to be the bottom of the pannier. Panniers are like little swoops that go on the hip of a dress. And what's going to happen is we're going to gather this entire rounded section up into a waistband in the middle. So even though it looks like that should be the bottom of the pannier, it is not the bottom. The straight side is the bottom, and this rounded side ends up getting gathered up into the waistband, and these straight side kind of creates that gathered ruffly hip piece that goes onto the dress.
Then the pannier is gathered and put onto a waistband, and we actually kept it separate from the rest of the dress so that she can wear it when she wants to and not when she doesn't. So now we're moving back to the lining of the dress. I decided to line the entire top part of the dress. I don't really care for it when commercial patterns tell you to do the kind of false collar style lining on the dress. I feel like, first off, it's just not really a great way to line a dress because I had dresses like that when I was a kid, and the collar part was always kind of like popping out of the top of the neckline. The other reason why we're doing this is because we have a lot of sensory issues in this house, and if we don't fully line the inside of this bodice, the lace is going to kind of poke through on the seams, and this is kind of a scratchy lace, especially since it has so much beading and sequins and whatnot going on. So we're going to use this lining to kind of cover up as much of those seams as we can. I've also made the top of this bodice, or the bodice, a little bit longer so that I can actually even extend the lining over the top of the seam where the skirt is going to connect into the bodice, so that all of that will be tucked up into the bodice lining itself, so we won't even have a waist seam to rub against skin on this dress. One of the last couple of things that I needed to do for this was to attach the lining down at the bottom of the dress, where the waist meets the bodice. I could machine sew most of this together, but I'd rather not machine sew the waistband or the waist of the bodice to the waist of the skirt for many reasons. There's just so many layers of fabric there. And also it's very difficult to see whether or not you are making a straight line on the front
and also catching all of the fabric you need to on the back. It was just easier for me to hand sew all of this lining down around the waist and around the zipper. So we ended up just spending a little bit of extra time doing that. The last thing I needed to do was cut away the extra mesh that came on this fabric. A lot of times when you are purchasing these kinds of like applique fabrics, the edges will come with additional mesh along the outside edges. I don't know exactly why they do this, but it needs to be cut away, otherwise it looks kind of wonky and ridiculous. So you cut away the edge of the mesh, and then what I'm doing here is just kind of melting the edge of it a little bit so that it's nice and clean along this kind of scalloped, lacy bottom to the fabric. And once that's done, this dress is complete and we can wear it in this wonderful spring season. And here's the finished product with our panniers. Then we can take off the panniers and have kind of a little more traditional dress that she can wear around a little bit more casually without them.